The gun was already cocked when Amara stepped into the room. Her hand was steady. Her breathing was controlled. She had done harder things in darker rooms and walked out clean every single time. This was supposed to be the same. Get in. Get it done. Get out. Get paid. Get gone. Kang Min-jae stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his Chicago penthouse with his back to her, looking out at a city he could no longer see. The skyline of Lakeshore Drive glittered below him like a scattered crown, the kind of view that costs money most people will never touch. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't give any signal at all that he knew she was there. She raised the gun, and then he spoke. "You don't have to do this." 3 words. Calm as still water. Like he was suggesting she put down a heavy bag rather than a loaded weapon aimed at the back of his skull. Amara's trigger finger went still. She had been told this man was a monster. She had been told removing him would be clean, necessary, a service to everyone his empire had ever touched. She had been told a lot of things over the past 3 weeks, but nobody had told her about the voice. Nobody had prepared her for the way those 3 words would reach inside her chest and pull at something she thought she had locked up years ago. "How do you know I'm here?" she asked, and hated herself for asking. Min-jae didn't turn around. "You breathe differently when you're about to act," he said. "I've been listening to you breathe for 3 weeks, Amara. I know the difference." The city burned below them, silent and indifferent. And in that room, in that moment, everything changed. Have you ever met someone who completely changed who you were? Not by trying, not by asking, but simply by being exactly what they were in the moment you needed it most? Before this story takes you somewhere you won't easily come back from, take a second right now and subscribe to Unique Love Stories. Hit that notification bell, share this with someone who needs to feel something real today, and let's grow this community together. Because this is the kind of story that deserves to be heard. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Chicago does not apologize for what it is. It sits on the edge of Lake Michigan like a fist. Steel and glass and concrete, stacked against a sky that swings between brutal cold and brutal heat, with nothing gentle in between. It is a city that has always understood that power is not given, it is taken, and that the difference between a king and a criminal is usually nothing more than the right paperwork and the right friends in the right offices. Kang Min-jae understood this perfectly. He had come to Chicago from Busan, South Korea, at age 19, with nothing but a name that meant something in certain circles back home, and the kind of intelligence that doesn't require a formal education to express itself. He had found his way into the city's Korean-American business network, legitimate on the surface, something else entirely underneath, and he had moved through it with the precision and patience of someone who had always been playing a longer game than the people around him. By 26, he controlled the eastern supply chain of the network. By 29, he had expanded it. By 32, Kang Min-jae was the kind of name that certain powerful men in Chicago said quietly, in rooms with thick walls and no phones present, with the particular careful tone of people who understand that saying a name too loudly is a form of summoning. He was not loud. He was not theatrical. He did not wave power around to impress people. He simply held it, steadily, completely, without apology. And the city around him operated in certain crucial ways according to systems he had put in place, and saw no reason to dismantle. He had enemies. Of course he had enemies. Any man who holds what Min-jae held will collect enemies the way a ship collects barnacles. Slowly, persistently, and always in the places you can't easily see from the deck. But 5 years ago, one of those enemies got specific. He had been driving through the South Loop on a November night. A route his security team had swept clean, a car that was supposed to be impenetrable, a schedule that was supposed to be known only to his most trusted people. The bomb was under the road, timed perfectly. Whoever placed it knew his exact route and his exact timing, and had access to information that could only have come from inside his organization. The explosion killed 2 of his bodyguards immediately. His driver lost the use of his right hand permanently, and Kang Min-jae, who had built 32 years of his life on the absolute reliability of his own perception, woke up in a hospital bed at Northwestern Memorial with his eyes open and a darkness in them that the doctors explained carefully and clinically and at considerable length. The optic nerves. Count the blast pressure. The fragments. Permanent. Irreversible. He listened to all of it without expression. When the doctors left, he sat in the dark that was now the only dark available to him, not the dark you choose, but the dark that simply is, permanently, without appeal. And he allowed himself something he almost never permitted: 4 minutes of honest reckoning with what had just been taken from him. Then he stopped. And he rebuilt. What he discovered in the months that followed surprised him. The world he had been navigating by sight was, it turned out, vastly incomplete. He had been reading rooms by what he could see. Now he read them by what he could hear, smell, feel in the quality of the air and the vibration of the floor, and the specific acoustic difference between a room with one person and a room with two. He had been reading threats by visible positioning. Now he read them by the slight change in breathing that happens when someone in a room decides to act. He became more dangerous. He had been a precise man before. He became a razor. His enemies had expected a diminished target. They received instead a man who could not be surprised by anything visible, because he had stopped needing the visible to know what was real. The empire held, grew, consolidated. But the person who planted the bomb was never found. And 18 months after the explosion, a second attempt came. A poisoning, discovered only because the compound used had a chemical signature, faint as smoke from 3 rooms away, that Min-jae caught in the bottom of a glass before he drank from it. And then a third. A sniper on a building across from his Streeterville compound. Neutralized by his security before the shot, the shooter dead before he could be questioned. 3 attempts, 3 failures, 3 cold trails. Someone wanted Kang Min-jae dead and had the patience, the resources, and the access to keep trying. The 4th attempt had a different shape. It didn't come as a bomb or a bullet or a poison. It came as a woman with a tray in her hands and a gun under her jacket, and a careful story about her employment history. It came as Amara. She was 27 years old, born in Atlanta to a Ghanaian father and an American mother, raised in a household that had started solid and then cracked, under pressures she hadn't fully understood, until she was old enough to see them clearly. Her father had left when she was 12. Her mother had done her best, which was considerable. But considerable doesn't always stretch far enough. Amara had grown up fast in the way that some kids do. Not because anyone taught her to, but because the alternative was falling behind in ways she couldn't afford. She had moved to Chicago at 22 for a restaurant management program that fell through in the 2nd semester when the school lost its accreditation. She had stayed anyway because going back to Atlanta felt like admitting something she wasn't ready to admit. She found work. Waitressing mostly. Good restaurants. The kind where the tips were enough to keep her above water if she was careful. She was always careful. Careful was the condition of her life. She had been approached by the organization through a contact she knew from a bartending job in River North. A man who had always seemed adjacent to things without being directly in them, who one afternoon over shift drinks had said, with the particular studied casualness of someone making an offer they've rehearsed, "I know some people who need someone like you for a specific kind of work. Pays well. Very well. Requires discretion and a certain kind of nerve." She had said no that day. She had said no 3 months later when he asked again. She had said yes the 3rd time, because by then she was looking at a number in a bank account that had been shrinking for 6 months, despite everything she did to stop it. And looking at a number the contact put on a piece of paper in front of her that was enough to change what the next 5 years of her life looked like entirely. The job was simple on paper. Get inside Kang Min-jae's Chicago compound as a service staff member. Build proximity. When the window opened, close it permanently. Walk away. The cover was airtight. The organization had people who built false identities the way architects build houses, solid at every level. Her application to the compound's private catering team was reviewed and accepted in 8 days. She was in. Her plan was clean. Get close. Get trusted. Pull the trigger. She had never planned on Kang Min-jae being what he actually was. The first time she served him, she expected the standard behavior of powerful men in her experience, the particular way they occupied space as if everyone else in it was scenery, the way they accepted service, the way they accepted furniture, present without acknowledging. She had served enough of them to know the choreography by heart. You become invisible. You do your job. You leave the room. Min-jae turned toward her before she set down the tray. Not looking. His eyes, dark and still, pointed somewhere past her shoulder, but oriented, fully present. Turned toward the specific location in the room where she was standing with the accuracy of someone who didn't need visual confirmation to know exactly where a person was. "You're new," he said. She nearly dropped the tray. "Yes, sir." "You're nervous," he said. "Your footsteps are uneven." Her heart spiked clean and fast. Professional mistake. She felt the adrenaline register in her body before she could control it, and she knew from the slight tilt of his head that he had heard something in her breathing change. "First week," she said, keeping her voice flat. "Still learning the layout." "Understandable," he said. Then, "What's your name?" "Amara, sir." A pause. The kind of pause that isn't empty. The kind that contains something being filed, organized, given a specific place. "Amara," he said, as if he was deciding how to carry it. "That's a good name." She left the room. She stood in the corridor outside with her back against the wall for exactly 3 seconds, telling herself that a man noticing her name was nothing. Standard power behavior. Gracious dominance. It meant nothing. She told herself this for approximately 4 more days, because what happened in the days that followed was not what she had been briefed to expect. He noticed her. Not in the way men with power usually notice women who work for them. Not with the particular entitled attention she had learned to navigate and deflect in 12 years of restaurant work. He noticed her the way you notice something real. The way you notice something that is actually there, fully, rather than something you've decided to look at. He remembered the specific sound of her footsteps among all the other footsteps in the compound. When she entered a room, he oriented toward her in that specific turned but not looking way, and he spoke to her as a person. He asked how she was adjusting to the job. He asked whether the other staff had been welcoming. He asked her once, on her 9th day, what she thought of the jazz that was playing in the background of the private dining room, a slow, late-night Miles Davis record that she had in fact been listening to without realizing it, something working its way into her chest while she cleared the table. "It sounds like the city at 3 a.m., she said, before she could run it through any filter. "Yes," he said, and something moved across his face. Not quite a smile, but the near neighborhood of one. Exactly that. She carried that moment around with her for days and hated herself for it. She was a professional. She had a mission. She had a number on a piece of paper that represented a real and significant change to the life she had been fighting to build. And she was not going to let a blind Korean mafia boss with a good ear for jazz complicate the geometry of what she had come here to do. She told herself this every morning when she was still clear-headed. By the end of her 2nd week, it was taking longer and longer for the telling to work. Because Min-jae was not performing anything. That was the thing she kept returning to. The thing that was dismantling her professional detachment piece by piece, whether she wanted it to or not. In her experience, powerful men were always performing something. Authority, ease, generosity, contempt. Even the decent ones were performing decency. There was always a layer of construction between who they were and what they showed the world. With Min-jae, there was none. Blindness had stripped it away. He couldn't see how he appeared, so he had stopped managing how he appeared. He simply was. And in Amara's life, which had been defined by the constant exhausting performance of being fine, being capable, being someone who did not need anything from anyone, that quality hit her somewhere she had not given anyone access to in years. The organization sent a check-in message at the end of her 2nd week. Progress report. Timeline? She typed back. Proximity established. Building trust. On schedule. She closed the app and lay awake for 2 hours. On her 20th day, she overheard something she wasn't supposed to hear. She had been clearing the service corridor near the compound's private conference room when the door opened and she caught 30 seconds of a conversation between Minji's head of security. A compact, watchful Korean-American man named James Park, who had worked for Min-jae for 7 years and whose assessment of people was, she had already gathered, almost never wrong, and one of the senior operation lieutenants. The lieutenant was saying, "The Chicago crew is pushing on the South Side territory again. They're not backing down." Park said, "He knows. He's already moved. They have muscle on Wentworth. Serious muscle." Park said flatly, "So does he." She kept moving down the corridor. But the 30 seconds stayed with her, not because of the content, but because of the tone. The absolute, unquestioning certainty in James Park's voice when he said "so does he." Not bravado, not performance. The simple tone of a man who has never had reason to doubt the person he works for. That kind of loyalty was not bought. It was earned. She thought about that longer than she should have. On her 23rd day, Min-jae stopped her in the hallway outside the kitchen. He was standing near the window alcove at a point she crossed every afternoon on her rotation between the kitchen and the dining room. He had positioned himself there specifically, she understood. He had been waiting. "Amara. Sir. Are you all right?" She felt the question land somewhere specific and inconvenient. Of course. Why do you ask? Something in your movement the last 2 days, he said. There's a weight in it that wasn't there before. She looked at him, at the still dark eyes that pointed past her, at the particular quality of his presence, fully attentive, fully aimed at the actual reality of her, rather than a version of her he found convenient. Long week, she said. If something is wrong, he said, and there was a care in his voice that she had not been briefed for, had not been prepared for, had no professional category to put it in. You can say so. You don't have to manage it alone. She opened her mouth to say something dismissive and professional and retreating. What came out instead was, "Nobody's said that to me in a long time." The corridor was very quiet. Minjay didn't move. He didn't make it strange. He simply said, "Then it was overdue," and excused himself with the quiet dignity of a man who knew when to leave a moment alone. She stood in that corridor for a full minute after he was gone. Then she went to the bathroom, ran cold water over her wrists, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long time. The organization's message came that night at midnight. It said, "Window closes in 72 hours. Confirm action or asset will be replaced." She read it 3 times. 72 hours. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the staff quarters of the compound she had infiltrated, and she held the phone, and she felt, with the particular clarity that comes when you have been avoiding something so successfully that its arrival catches you completely unprepared, that she was in serious trouble. Not professional trouble. Human trouble. She had let him become real to her. That was the cardinal error. The one thing she had promised herself, in every difficult situation she had navigated in her adult life, she would never do. You kept people in the category they needed to stay in. You kept the distance managed. You did not let the target become a person. But he had become a person approximately 4 days in, and she had been lying to herself about it ever since. 72 hours. She got up. She assessed the compound with the professional part of herself that had been sitting in the back corner getting ignored for 3 weeks. She identified the window, his private office, late evening, after the security sweep, the camera cycle, the guard position, the room layout, clean approach, clean exit, under 90 seconds. She had done harder things in worse circumstances. She told herself this for 71 hours. Then she picked up the gun and walked to his office. The door was unlocked. It was always unlocked in the evenings. She had learned this in her first week, part of the pattern she had mapped. She pushed it open quietly, stepped inside, eased it shut behind her. He was at his desk, a document in his hands, braille, his fingers moving across the raised dots with the absorbed focus of someone reading something they care about. The lamp in the corner cast a low amber light across the room. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glittered in the November dark. The lake a black edge beyond the lights, the city laid out below them like a living map. She moved to the center of the room. She raised the gun. She aimed. "You don't have to do this," he said. And the world stopped. She held the gun level, controlled her breathing. "How long have you known?" "Since your first week," he said. He set the document down with the care of someone placing something valuable. "You move like someone trained. The way you enter a room, you catalog exits before you set down anything in your hands. You position yourself instinctively near walls. You hold your weight distribution forward, ready to act. These are not habits of service, they are habits of preparation. And you said nothing." "I was waiting to understand what kind of person you were," he said. "Not what you'd been sent to do. Who you were, underneath the mission." She stared at the back of his head. "And? What did you decide?" He was quiet for a moment. "I decided," he said slowly, "that you are someone who has been fighting alone for so long that being offered a choice feels dangerous." The gun was still raised. Her arm was steady. Her breathing was steady. Every other part of her was not. "I was hired to kill you," she said. Her voice came out rawer than she intended. "I took money to come into this house and get close to you and put a bullet in your head. You should be afraid of me?" "I know exactly what you were hired to do," he said. "I've known for 19 days. And I'm not afraid of you." "Why not?" "Because you're still here," he said. "If you were going to do it, you would have done it before now." She lowered the gun 2 inches, then caught herself and raised it back. "You don't know that," she said. "No," he agreed. "But I believe it." He turned then, not toward the gun but toward her voice. orienting in that specific way, fully present, fully attentive. Amara, he said, whatever they offered you, whatever made this seem like the only option, I need you to know that there is another one. She opened her mouth. The alarms went off. Not one alarm. Every alarm in the building. Simultaneous. A wall of sound that hit them both at once. And underneath it, an immediate and unmistakable gunfire, not targeted shots. Suppression fire, the kind you lay down when you want to overwhelm a space and you don't care about precision. Minjae was on his feet in a single motion. That's not your team, he said. No, she said, because she understood in the same instant he did. She had been checking in with the organization on schedule. She had been sending progress reports that were technically accurate. Proximity established, trust building, without confirming action. 30 days of delay. 30 days of a mission that should have taken 2 weeks. The organization had made a calculation about what that delay meant. They had sent a team, not to complete the mission, to clean it up, her included. She was a liability now. She knew too much. She had gotten too close, and she had failed to act. In the organization's arithmetic, that made her a problem of the same order as the target. They were here to kill them both. How many exits does this floor have? She said, and the professional part of her, the part that had been sitting in the back corner getting ignored for 3 weeks, snapped into full operation with the clean, cold efficiency of someone who has just been handed a situation with no room for anything except the job. Stairwell north end, service elevator south, both will be covered. He moved to the panel beside his bookshelf, operating it by touch, with a sureness that reminded her, even now, even in this, that this was his house, his space, built to his understanding. I'm engaging secondary lockdown, buys 3 minutes before they breach the inner door. 3 minutes is enough, she said. She checked the gun, 12 rounds, full, and she did the thing that she had not done for the past 3 weeks, because doing it had been professionally inconvenient. She read the room exactly as it was. Threat assessment, entry points, response time, tactical options. Then she looked at the man standing 4 feet away from her, blind, calm, fully present. And she made the decision she had actually been making for 19 days without admitting it to herself. She was going to protect him. Stay on my left, she said. Close enough that you can track my movement. I'll call every turn. He nodded once. No argument, no hesitation. He oriented to her position, and he trusted her completely, and the clean weight of that trust landed in her chest like something she intended to be worthy of. They moved. She pulled the office door open and took the corridor fast, Minjae 1 step behind her left shoulder, close enough that she could feel his presence tracking her movement without touching. Straight corridor, 30 feet, she said quietly. Guard, ours, down on the right. Door on the left, closed. Stairwell at the end, covered. Service corridor, he said, behind the left door, connects to the west side. She took the left door. The service corridor was narrow and dark, and ran the length of the building's western interior. She moved through it with the gun up, calling the layout as they went. Maintenance closet, locked, another door at the midpoint, the corridor bending right toward the west stairwell. She could hear the sounds of the breach now. Boots on floors above and below them, coordinated movement. Professional and deliberate. How many? She asked. By the entry pattern. Minjae paused, and she understood he was reading the sound and vibration of the building the way she read a room visually. 12, minimum. Possibly 15. 4 points of entry. Your security team? 6 of mine confirmed active. The others I don't know. Comms? Compromised. They hit the communications relay first. James Park will have activated the backup system, but it'll take him 8 minutes. 8 minutes. She ran the math. 12 to 15 professionals with interior access. 8 minutes until backup comms. 6 confirmed security personnel of uncertain position and status. She and Minjae in a service corridor on the 34th floor. All right, she said. Here's what we're going to do. They came out of the west stairwell on the 32nd floor and hit the first group in the secondary corridor. 3 of them. Moving north in a tight formation, weapons up, sweeping. Professional body language. These were not amateurs. The organization had sent their best people. She was already moving. She came low out of the stairwell door, under the arc of the lead operative's weapon, drove her shoulder into him with everything she had, and used his momentum to swing him into the corridor wall. He hit hard. She was already on the second one. inside his weapon range before he could adjust, left forearm blocking his weapon arm wide, right palm heel driving up under his chin. He went down. The third one swung toward her and she fired once. And the gun in her right hand coming up in a clean arc. Not center mass, the weapon arm. And he dropped the rifle and went down hard. All three down. 7 seconds. 3, she said to Min-jae, breathing measured. This corridor clear. Northwest Suite has a secondary security room, he said. James will be there. Or moving toward it. They moved northwest. The second group found them in the crossing corridor near the elevator bank. 4 operatives coming from the east, better spaced than the first 3, moving in pairs with overlapping coverage. She assessed them in a half-second and made the call. The 2 on the right were the primary threat. The 2 on the left were support watching the coverage gap. She took the coverage gap. She moved left, fast and low, drawing the right pair's attention. Felt both support operatives tracking her and let them. Because Min-jae was behind her, and she needed the support pair looking at her rather than at him, and she had calculated that she could manage 4 in a corridor if she controlled the geometry. She fired twice. Both right-side operatives, weapon arms. They dropped. Then she was among the 2 support operatives before they could fully refocus, close enough that firearms were irrelevant, and she was not small and she was not slow, and she had been in tighter situations than this. She put the first one down with a strike combination that had been trained into her body through years of situations that didn't allow for deliberation. The second one caught her across the left shoulder with a strike that she took, rather than avoided because taking it let her get inside his guard. And she put him down with her elbow and her knee and her full body weight. 4, down. Her left shoulder screaming. 4 more, she said. East corridor, down. My shoulder took a hit. How bad? Manageable. The beat. He was already learning it, the specific silence that meant she was being less than fully honest. Tell me honestly, he said. Hurts. Not structural. I can work. All right. They found James Park on the 32nd floor in the secondary security room with 2 of Min-jae's operatives, holding position and managing what communications he could through the backup system. He looked at Amara with an expression that contained an entire conversation he clearly decided to have later. 5 more confirmed inside, he said to Min-jae. 2 holding the north stairwell, 2 on the 31st, 1 unaccounted for. The unaccounted one worries me, Amara said. It should, Park said. North stairwell is covered from outside, she said, thinking through it fast. If we can push the 2 on 31 toward the north stairwell, the 2 holding it become a problem for the people approaching from behind rather than from us. Park looked at her for a moment, then at Min-jae. Some silent communication passed between them. Do it, Min-jae said. She and Park took the 31st floor together. The 2 operatives there had positioned themselves well. Good coverage of the central corridor, the stairwell access controlled. Any direct approach would be costly. She and Park didn't approach directly. Park went right. She went left. She came through the fire door on the west end moving fast and loud, drawing both operatives rotating toward her. And Park came in from the east in the gap she'd created, and they put both operatives down in 11 seconds without firing a shot. You've done this before, Park said, looking at her while they moved the incapacitated operatives. Yes, she said. For who? Nobody worth naming. He looked at her again with that contained, evaluating look. You came here to kill him. Yes. But you didn't. No. Why not? She thought about the corridor, the jazz, the way he said her name, the 4 weeks of being seen by someone who could not see her. Because I was wrong about him, she said. Park absorbed this. Then he nodded once, knew with the particular economy of a man who has spent 7 years making accurate assessments of people in difficult situations. It was, she would realize later, the moment she was accepted. They drove the north stairwell operatives into confusion exactly as she'd planned. The 2 approaching from below collided with the 2 they'd flushed from 31, and the resulting chaos was loud enough that Min-jae and the 2 operatives with him used it as cover to move to the compound's interior safe room. The unaccounted for operative appeared at 2:47 a.m. He came through the service entrance on 33, quiet and disciplined, clearly the team's specialist, the one they sent when everything else had failed. He was good. Better than the others. He moved without sound, and he had a specific destination in mind. Min-jae. Amara was in the corridor between him and that destination because she had been thinking about the unaccounted operative for the past 40 minutes, and she had decided that the service entrance on 33 was where she would have come in if she were the specialist sent to finish the job. She was waiting for him. It was not clean. He was good, and she was working with a shoulder that had taken 2 more impacts since the 31st floor, and she was running on the far side of her reserves. They moved through each other in the corridor like 2 people who have been trained by the same brutal curriculum, and it took longer than the others, and it cost her. A cut above her left eye that bled into her vision, a knee she'd have to put ice on for 3 days. But she was still standing when it was over. He was not. She sat against the corridor wall for 30 seconds with her head back, breathing. Then she got up. Min-jae heard her enter the safe room before she reached the door. "Amara. Last one's down," she said. "It's clear." He crossed the room toward her voice and she stood still while he came, and when he reached her he lifted his hand and very carefully, precisely, exactly the way he did everything, found the cut above her eye with his fingertips, and assessed it the way a person does when they cannot see and must understand through touch. "You need stitches," he said. "I need a minute," she said. "Then I'll need stitches." He didn't move his hand away. He stood close to her in the dim safe room, with Chicago burning outside the windows, and the compound quiet around them for the first time in 2 hours. And she let herself feel, just for that minute she'd asked for, the full weight of everything that had just happened. Then James Park came through the door with a medic, and the work of the aftermath began. By 5 a.m., the compound's communications were fully restored. By 6 a.m., the Chicago PD's Organized Crime Division, a number of whose senior members had particular reasons to maintain a working relationship with Min-jae's organization, had been briefed on the attack and were processing the 11 incapacitated operatives currently zip-tied in various locations throughout the building. 2 had escaped through the north perimeter before the lockdown completed. 1, the specialist, was in serious condition at Northwestern Memorial under police guard. James Park gave Min-jae a full briefing at 6:30 a.m. with Amara present. "The attack team was contracted," Park said. 3 layers of shell contracting, but the origin traces to the same financial structure as the previous 3 attempts. "You've been working on this for 3 years," Amara said. "Yes," Park said. "We have pieces, not the full picture." "I have pieces from the other side," she said. "Contact structure, communication protocols, the approach pattern they used to recruit me." She paused. "I can fill some of the gaps." Park looked at her, then at Min-jae. "Put it together," Min-jae said. They sat in the compound's intelligence room, Park, Amara, and 2 of Min-jae's senior analysts, and they built the picture from both ends simultaneously. Her pieces from the inside of the organization, his pieces from 3 years of threads and traces and the wreckage of 3 failed attempts. The analysts connected the structures, cross-referenced the financial trails, matched the operational patterns. It took 4 hours, and then the 3 names at the center of it emerged from the assembled data like shapes from fog. The first was Vincent Caruso, not a Korean name, not a name from Min-jae's world, which was part of why it had taken 3 years to arrive at it. Caruso was a senior partner in a private equity firm in the Loop that had been attempting for years to acquire controlling interest in the supply chain networks that Min-jae's organization managed. Legitimate on paper, predatory in practice, and willing, it now appeared, to fund extra-legal solutions when the legal ones stalled. He had the motive and the money. He had been the financial architect of everything. The second was David Rhee, Korean-American, former federal law enforcement, currently running a private security consulting firm in Evanston. He had worked in the Organized Crime Division for 11 years before a departure that had appeared voluntary and was, according to certain people who knew the details, considerably less so. He had the operational knowledge, the network, and the professional capability to design 3 assassination attempts that had been sophisticated enough to kill everyone except their target. He was the architect of the attempts themselves, the bomb, the poisoning, the sniper. All Rhee. The third name was the one that landed differently. Michael Yoon, Korean-American, 41 years old. A man who had been, for 6 years, one of Min-jae's 2 most trusted financial lieutenants. Who had sat in this compound and eaten at this table and been trusted with the kind of access that required complete loyalty. Who had resigned from Min-jae's organization 4 years ago, 17 months before the bomb, to take a private position in corporate finance, and whose departure had appeared clean and mutual and without conflict. The bomb had happened 17 months after he left. He had known the routes. He had known the protocols. He had known which members of the security team could be compromised and which couldn't. He had known everything needed to plant a device precisely where a car would be, precisely when that car would be there. The silence in the room when Park put Michael Yoon's name on the screen was the specific silence of something that had been suspected and never confirmed, suddenly becoming confirmed. Min-jae was very still. "Michael," he said. "3 sources," Park said. "Independent corroboration through the financial trail and through the communication records we got from the attack team's operational prep." "He was at the compound the day before the explosion," Min-jae said. "I remember his voice. I remember exactly where he was standing in the room." Nobody said anything. Amara watched Min-jae absorb this with the particular quality of stillness she had come to understand was not calm, but rather something volatile held in absolute control. She watched him take the full weight of it. 3 years of attempts, 5 people dead, his sight, all of it tracing back to a man he had trusted completely. And she did not try to fill the silence because there was nothing to put in it that would help. After a long moment, he said, "When do we move?" Rhee was first. He was the operational threat. The one with the direct capability to send another team, the one whose network needed to be severed before anything else could be done safely. His consulting firm ran out of a converted warehouse space in Evanston. His personal security was competent but not exceptional, which was the weakness of men who design security for others without taking their own exposure seriously. Amara went to Evanston with 2 of Min-jae's best people on a Wednesday night. She had expected to feel something when she stood in David Rhee's office at 2 a.m. and told him what she knew and what she needed from him. She had expected the weight of the violence to land on her the way it sometimes did in quiet moments after difficult situations. What she felt instead was a cold and specific clarity. This man had designed the bomb that took Min-jae's sight. He had designed the poisoning attempt. He had designed the sniper. He had been doing this methodically, patiently, for 3 years, and he had killed people in the process. Min-jae's bodyguards, people with families, people who had simply been in a car doing their jobs. She gave him one opportunity to provide what they needed: the full account structure, the communication records, the documentation connecting Caruso and Yoon to every attempt. Rhee gave it. Quickly. Completely. The particular speed of a man who understands that his operational capability is useless in a room with a person who has already made a decision. After everything he had done, after the accounting was complete, David Rhee did not leave that office. Amara made sure of it. Not with anger. Not with anything personal. With the clean, specific certainty of someone removing a threat that had already cost too much and would, if left operational, cost more. She drove back to Chicago before dawn. She put the documentation on Min-jae's desk and said, "Rhee is done." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" "Yes." The beat. "Ask me in a week," she said. "I will," he said. And it was a promise, not a pleasantry, and she believed it. Vincent Caruso was handled differently. He was visible, a public business figure with a legal team and political relationships and a level of institutional protection that made direct action complicated and messy. But he was also, Park's analysis confirmed, the financial engine. Without Caruso's capital, the entire operation dissolved. Min-jae's attorney arranged the meeting. A private negotiation regarding certain mutual business interests, conducted in a conference room at a law firm in the West Loop on a Friday afternoon. Caruso came with 2 attorneys and a personal security detail. He came because men like Caruso, when invited to a private negotiation with Kang Min-jae, understand that declining is a statement they don't want to make. Min-jae came with Park, Amara, and the documentation from Rhee's office. The meeting lasted 51 minutes. At the end of it, Vincent Caruso had signed over 3 specific financial instruments that, in Park's considered assessment, constituted a complete relinquishment of his leverage over the Eastern supply chain. He had also listened to a precise and thorough description of exactly what documentation existed, met where multiple copies of it were held, by whom, under what conditions of release, and what would happen to his life, his firm, his family's financial holdings, and his freedom if anything further occurred involving Kang Min-jae or anyone connected to him or anyone named Amara Osei. Caruso left the conference room a man with significantly fewer options than he had entered it. He was finished without a body, which was, as Min-jae observed on the drive home, sometimes the most complete kind of finished. Michael Yoon was the last, and the last was the one that required Min-jae to carry something heavier than the others. They found Yoon in the Lincoln Park neighborhood. A nice condo, quiet block, the kind of address that suggested a man who had been paid well for his betrayal and had been living comfortably on it for 4 years, while the consequences of what he had set in motion played out in someone else's life. Min-jae went himself. With Amara. With Park. 2 operatives outside. Yoon was awake when they arrived. It was late and he was sitting at his kitchen table with a glass in front of him in the particular posture of a man who had been waiting for something without admitting he was waiting. He looked at Min-jae when they came in, and something in his face did the thing faces do when the truth they've been avoiding for years arrives in the room with them. Min-jae sat down across from him. He spoke quietly. He laid out everything. What he knew. How he knew it. In the full scope of it, from the financial trail to the communication records, to Rhee's full accounting. He did this without theater, without anger in his voice, with the same controlled precision he applied to everything. And then, he asked one question. Why? Yoon looked at the table. The accounts, he said. I had moved money. Not a little. Enough that when you found it, and you would have found it, there was no explaining it. And Caruso approached me before I left. He told me he could make the problem disappear. He paused. And I was afraid of you. Afraid. Yes. Min-jae was quiet for a long moment. You came to the hospital, he said. After the explosion, you sat with me. Yoon said nothing. You knew what you had done, Min-jae said. You sat in that room with me, and you knew. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. That, Min-jae said, I cannot forgive. What happened to Michael Yoon in that kitchen on that night was a reckoning of the kind that does not involve courtrooms or attorneys, or the procedures of systems that were not built for what he had done. He had arranged the deaths of 5 people. He had taken a man's sight. He had spent 4 years living comfortably in Lincoln Park while that man rebuilt his life in the dark. He had sat in a hospital room with the consequences of his own choices and said nothing. Justice for that lived in a kitchen at midnight with the man who had trusted him. Michael Yoon did not leave that kitchen. When it was finished, Amara stood beside Min-jae on the sidewalk outside in the cold Chicago night, and she felt the weight of all 3, Rhee, Caruso, Yoon, settle into her completely. Not doubt. Not regret in the way of people who make wrong choices and then feel the wrongness of them. But the specific gravity of things done that cannot be undone, and that were, she believed, without flinching, necessary. It's over, she said. Yes, he said. They stood there for a moment in the cold, the lake wind coming through the gap between buildings, Chicago moving around them as it always did. How do you feel? She asked. He thought about this honestly. Like I can breathe again, he said. For the first time in 5 years. She took his hand. They stood in the cold together. The weeks that followed were the first weeks of Amara's adult life that were not shaped by the need to survive what was coming next. She had been in survival mode for so long that the absence of it felt strange, and then, slowly, like something she was learning to trust. She had quarters in the compound now. Real ones, not the staff room she'd inhabited for the first month. She had a role that was hers by choice rather than cover. She sat in on briefings, contributed to strategy, managed the security restructuring that Park had been wanting to implement for 2 years, and now had the full support and resources to do. The empire stabilized without the external pressure of the consortium. Territories that had been contested settled. Agreements that had been blocked by Caruso's interference moved forward. The organization became, in the months following the clearing of its 3 enemies, more functional and more solid than it had been in years. James Park, who had spent the first month watching Amara with the careful assessment of a man responsible for protecting someone he valued, one afternoon handed her a key card for the operations level without comment. She turned it over in her hand and looked at him. Don't make me regret it, he said. I won't, she said. He almost smiled. I know, he said. That's why I gave it to you. And in the spaces between the operational hours, something else was building. The thing that had been building since a corridor and a jazz record, and the specific weight of being noticed by someone who noticed the real thing, rather than the managed version. She learned him more slowly than she had in the first month. In the first month, she had been learning him tactically, the way a person learns terrain. Now she was learning him the way you learn someone you have decided matters, which is slower and less systematic, and considerably more disorienting. He played the piano late at night, when the compound was quiet. She discovered this on her 3rd week of actual residence. sat in the hallway outside the music room one night, and listened to a slow, specific piece that she had no name for, but that felt exactly like what she already knew about him, precise and controlled on the surface, something much larger moving underneath. When he heard her stop in the corridor, he stopped playing. "Don't," she said. He resumed. She sat on the bench near the window and listened until he finished. He told her about the bomb, not the facts of it. She knew the facts. He told her what it was like to wake up in the darkness that didn't go away, on what the first year was. The specific work of rebuilding not just the operational capacity of the organization, but the interior architecture of himself. The part that had always relied on visual confirmation, on seeing the room, on knowing what he was walking into by looking at it. "I was angry for about a month," he said, "which is longer than I'd usually allow myself." "That seems like a reasonable timeline," she said. "Then I decided," he said, "that being angry at a darkness that was permanent was the same as being angry at weather. The energy was better used elsewhere." "You just decided?" "Yes. I wish I could do that," she said. "You do," he said. "You've been doing it your whole life. You just call it something else." She looked at him. "You call it moving forward," he said. "You don't let yourself be angry because being angry means stopping, so you move instead. The anger comes anyway, but it comes behind you rather than in front of you." She was quiet for a long moment. "Nobody has ever described me that accurately," she said. "I've been paying attention," he said. She knew he had. That was the thing, the continuous specific thing about Kang Min-jae. He had always been paying attention. Since the first moment she walked into a room with a tray in her hands and a mission in her jacket. He had been paying attention to the actual her, not the cover, not the performance, not the version she presented to rooms she needed to navigate safely. The real one, the one underneath. And the thing about being seen that clearly, by someone you had fought beside and bled beside and chosen repeatedly in the most concrete possible sense, was that it made the managing and the distance and the professional detachment feel like something you no longer needed, like putting down a bag you had been carrying for so long you had forgotten it was heavy. She put it down. On a February night when Chicago was doing the thing it does in February, cold that has moved past dramatic into simply relentless, the lake a gray slate beyond the windows, the city hunkered down in its bones. They were in the kitchen after midnight because neither of them slept well, and the kitchen was where they both ended up on those nights, and he said the thing that had been in the room between them for months. "I need to tell you something." "All right?" "In 12 years of this life," he said, "I have not permitted myself to need anything I couldn't replace. That was the rule. Nothing irreplaceable, nothing that could be taken and leave something that couldn't be rebuilt." She waited. "You are irreplaceable," he said, directly. Without performance, without cushioning, without the careful management of impression that most people use when they say something that makes them vulnerable. "I don't know how to want something this much and not be afraid of losing it, but I know that I would rather be afraid of losing you than protect myself from needing you." The kitchen was very quiet. "Min-jae," she said. "I know your history," he said. "I know this is not the life you planned. I know I am not a simple thing to choose, but I am asking you if you are willing to choose it, to choose this. To choose." He paused, and something moved across his face, something completely unguarded. "Me." Amara looked at him across the kitchen counter. At the man who had heard her coming before he saw her face, who had known she was lying and had waited to understand who she was underneath the lie. Who had said you don't have to do this with a gun at his skull, and had meant it as a genuine offer of another option. "I already did," she said. "The night I lowered the gun." He let out a breath that contained, she thought, about 3 years of something held carefully in check. "Then we're agreed," he said. "We're agreed," she said. He came around the counter and she met him halfway, because that was who they were. Two people who had always met each other halfway, from the first moment, and were not going to change that now. He held her face in his hands the same way he had assessed the cut above her eye on the night of the attack. Carefully, precisely, learning by touch what he could not confirm by sight. And she stood still for it, because she had learned over these months that being still for him was not the same as being passive. It was a form of trust. It was what it looked like when you stopped managing the distance. "I love you," she said. "I love you," he said. In the kitchen on the 34th floor, with Chicago relentless and cold outside the windows, two people who had tried to be enemies found their way into the only thing neither of them had planned for: each other. They were married on a Saturday in April. Not large, not theatrical. Neither of them had any use for theatrical. They were married in the compound's inner courtyard when Chicago was doing the April thing. Unpredictable, cold bright, the lake visible from the upper floors as a blade of reflected light, the trees in the courtyard doing the tentative first green of a spring that was still deciding whether to commit. James Park stood with Min-jae. He wore the same contained expression he wore for most things, but Amara caught him, once, looking at Min-jae with something that was not contained at all. And she looked away, and gave him that moment, because it was his. Two women who had worked in the compound since before Amara arrived stood with her. They had watched the whole arc of this with the particular quiet investment of people close to something real, and they had said nothing and asked nothing, and made it clear through the specific language of small, consistent kindness that they were glad it had happened. Min-jae wore charcoal, Amara wore ivory. The courtyard smelled like the planter boxes along the south wall. Something green and alive and new in the cold, bright air. He spoke first. "I spent 5 years learning to navigate a world I couldn't see," he said. "I learned that most of what I thought I needed to see, I didn't. That the things worth knowing about the world arrive through other means, through sound and weight, and the specific feel of what is real. Through what you learn about a person when you listen rather than look." He paused. "I have listened to you," he said, "and what I have heard is someone who fights for the things that matter with everything she has, who does not perform strength but lives it, who chose me, repeatedly, at cost, when she had every reason not to. I will spend whatever remains of my life making sure that choice was the right one." Amara took a breath. "I came here to end something," she said. "I stayed to protect something. And what I have found, in between those two decisions, is the only thing I have ever been willing to be completely honest about." She looked at him, at the still dark eyes that couldn't see her face, but were oriented toward her completely, fully, the way they always were. "I don't have a version of my future that doesn't have you in it. I didn't plan that. I didn't want it when it started. But it is the truest thing I know, and I will fight for it the way I fight for everything, which is to say completely, and without stopping, and until the thing is won." He smiled. The full one. The unguarded one that almost no one ever saw. She kissed him in the April light while Chicago moved around them, indifferent and alive. James Park made a sound that was technically a cough. The compound settled into a rhythm after the wedding that felt, for the first time in the years Min-jae had held it, like something sustainable, rather than defended. The removal of the external threat had changed the atmosphere of the place. Not dramatically, not in ways most people would notice, but in the specific way that a building changes when it stops bracing for impact. The tension that had been the constant background note of operations for 3 years was gone. People moved differently. Decisions were made from strategic clarity rather than reactive pressure. The empire stood. It would stand. Not because of any single victory or any single enemy removed, but because of the quality at the foundation. The specific understanding that real power, the kind that lasts, is not the power to destroy, but the power to build and maintain, and adapt. Min-jae had always known this, but having Amara beside him, her particular combination of operational precision and refusal to manage her humanity out of the equation, had changed how he exercised it. Park noted this in his private assessments without mentioning it to anyone. Things were being decided better. Not faster, not more aggressively, better, with a fuller accounting of the human factors involved. Which was not what he would have predicted from the addition of a person who had arrived as an assassin, but which was, now that he saw it operating, not surprising at all. Amara ran the security restructuring she and Park had been building toward. She developed a new training protocol for the compound's protection team that was more comprehensive and significantly more effective than what had existed before. She built a relationship with 2 of Min-jae's senior operations people that was based on mutual respect and worked because she gave it, and because they gave it back. She was home. Not the kind you're born into or handed or stumble into by accident. The kind you build from the wreckage of the life that didn't work, with your own hands, choosing every piece of it consciously. On a night in late spring, they were on the penthouse terrace, the one with the unobstructed view of Lake Michigan, the water going gold in the last of the sunset. The city behind them, and the lake ahead. She was describing the view to him in the way she had developed. Not just the visual facts, but the quality of it, the specific texture of the light, the way the water moved. The lake is doing the thing it does at this time of year, she said, where the color isn't one color. It's about 12 colors at once, and they keep shifting. Show me, he said. She took his hand and held it up toward the last of the light. The warmth of it still just barely there, the fading gold of it on their skin. That, she said. That's what it looks like. He was quiet for a moment, feeling the warmth. Yes, he said. I see it. She leaned into his shoulder. Chicago moved around them, vast and indifferent and alive, doing what cities do, carrying on its 10,000 ordinary dramas without any awareness of this specific one. And the lake did what the lake always did in spring, which was to remind everyone looking at it that it was bigger than them and older than them, and would be there long after every empire and every name had dissolved back into the ground. But on that terrace, in the last of the light, a man who had learned to see the world without his eyes, and a woman who had learned to stop running and start choosing stood together. And the thing between them was real in the way that only the things you fight for and choose and build from the honest raw material of who you actually are real. And that is everything. That is the whole of it. Two people who were supposed to be enemies found out what they were actually capable of, not the destruction they had both spent years practicing, but this quiet, this chosen, this real. Tell us in the comments, what was the moment that got you? Was it when she lowered the gun? When he said her name like it was worth keeping? The kitchen in February? Or the terrace at the end? Drop it below. And if this story hit somewhere real, share it right now. Someone in your life needs to see this today. Subscribe to Unique Love Stories. Hit that bell, because we are here every week with stories that remind you what people are capable of when they stop surviving and start choosing. Some people are sent to end you, and some of those people become the reason you finally learn to live.